Hello, everyone. This is History of Science Nights. We're meeting again after a couple of months time lapse. And this is a program for history of, organized by the Department of History of Science, Istanbul Medeniyet University. And this night, our visitor, Professor Robert Morrison, will be talking about the Jewish scholars in the Ottoman realm in the 15th and the 16th centuries. It's going to be quite interesting talk. And let me just give you a couple hints. We will have options to be able to ask questions in the end. So if you have any questions at the moment or any time during the conversation, please put it into chat and we will ask for you. And you can do this in the end of the session as well. And at the moment, I think if you have any problem with the voices, the sounds, it might be because of your own computer. First, please do check your Zoom connections or your Bluetooth or microphone connections, please. And then if you still have any problem, do let us know that we might actually have some technical problems. We will try to solve this fashionable way. Okay, I will leave the microphone to Sana Aydın for her to explain us a little bit more about Professor Morrison. Please go ahead, Sana.
Thank you. Dear guests, we are very lucky to have Robert Morrison, who is a professor of religion of Islamic science and the chair of the religion department at Bowdoin College, the US. He is also the current president of the Commission on the History of Science and Technology in Islamic Societies. His recent book, The Light of the World, Astronomy in Al-Andalus, deals with scientific theories which were produced in Al-Andalus in the 15th century, which traveled first to the Ottoman court, then to the University of Padua, Italy. He has various publications on scientific exchanges between the Islamic world and Europe. So, Professor, my first question is, actually allow me to begin with a question about a scholar whom you brought the focus on, Moses Galeno, who wrote treatises in Arabic under the name Musa Jalinus, as a potential transmitter of scientific information between the Ottoman Empire and the Republic of Venice. Could you tell us more about his contributions to Ottoman science?
Of course. Thank you for having me, and thank you for rescheduling for a few months and making and accommodating my own needs. I think Moses Galeano, who, as you said, wrote in Arabic and in Ottoman Turkish as under the name Musa Jalinus, is a truly fascinating figure. In terms of, to answer your question directly, I would say, strictly speaking, his one important contribution he made to Ottoman science was a text he wrote called I mean, the words are derived from Arabic, but the text is in Turkish. It's Risala fi Tabaya el Adviya va Istamaliha. So, treatise on the natures of medicines and their use. I've published, if you're interested, I've published this in 2017 in Nazariyat, so you can all read it. I think it's an important text because in it he mentions Latin sources, and so it's fascinating that in the time of Sultan either Bayazid or perhaps Sultan Selim, but certainly in the second decade of the 16th century, that there was this interest in what Western physicians had to say. So that's one important contribution he made. Another one is a text, an Arabic translation he produced in the previous decade, which was a version, perhaps a translation, but certainly a version of some highly significant European tables. That is, tables for planetary positions. The Latin title is Almanach Perpetuum, and he dedicated his version to the Qadi Askar, the chief military judge, Abdurrahman Muayyad Zadeh, someone who's getting a little more scholarly attention these days. And so in terms of text, those are his two major contributions. I would say as an original thinker, I mean, I think there are probably more impressive people out there in these centuries in the Ottoman Empire. On the other hand, as someone who was moving around the Eastern Mediterranean and bringing Western knowledge to the Ottomans, but also bringing Islamic knowledge to the Republic of Venice, he's hard to top. And I think I guess the last thing I'll say is from the perspective of the history of Ottoman science, there's been work done on, say, Fatih Sultan Mehmet's interest in Europe and European science. That's well established. I think but it's interesting to see that with Galeano Jalinus, this interest went on into the reign of like the next sultan. And I'm not, obviously I'm not doing this to say that, the West is what, is the model, is the source of science. Oh no, I just think what we're finding is that there's greater communication, greater intellectual exchange for longer than we knew. And I think that's really fascinating for all scholars to know about.
About Musa Jalinus, I work on astronomical instruments, and
I do know,
we have one spherical astrolabe in the world, one extant astrolabe, the example, and it is signed by Musa. And David King actually assumes that this might be Musa Gallianos. So do you have any kind of research that you actually come across that he actually might have been the instrument maker of this kind of an instrument?
So I'm aware of that kind of text circulating on academia.edu. I've read it, and I think very highly of David King's work. I think if you're right, it might be Musa Jalinus, Moses Galeano, but it might be. Of course, there are many instrument makers well, not many, but there were others, and there are a lot of people named Musa, and the one. As much as I would like to say yes, and as much respect I have for David King, the one concern I do have, because you asked, is that Galeano seems to be a real self-promoter. He is not shy about talking about how great he is, how smart he was, how much he knew, and who he knew. So I'm surprised he never talked about, that doesn't mean, it doesn't extinguish or eliminate the possibility, but it's strange to me that he never mentions this, because he talks about everything else he did, right?
And he worked on astronomy as well, right? He actually wrote about astronomy as well, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, going back to Sana's first question, I forgot to say this. Another kind of interesting, in terms of scholarly exchange, I should have said this one, I just forgot, it's been 10 years. Another text Galeano Jalinus wrote is an Arabic script version of a text I wrote my second book about. So interestingly, he produces an Arabic version of a Jewish text, and that Arabic version, that text ends up in the Üçüncü Ahmet collection in the Topkapi, right? So in the Sultan's personal library, right? Like, so it's not so much the content of what's in there, like I guess we knew it, but I mean, oh my, how often do you see Jewish texts getting translated into Arabic in Arabic script, right? That's a fascinating, for a sultan, that's a fascinating cultural phenomenon. And that's the kind of guy he was. He was like he was a social climber. And thus, I guess when I think about his personality, I just don't, here's another example. An Italian scholar I unfortunately haven't met, but I do know of his work. In his doctoral dissertation, this guy, Giacomo Corazzo, and he wrote it, I mean, it's in Italian, but okay. And he was doing some work on Jews in Crete who passed through Crete, and Galeano Jalinus passes through Crete. And so, I mean, I had found out myself, and this scholar, Dr. Corazzo, found in the Venetian archives an anecdote where they need someone to translate from, and Galeano's like, oh, I'll do it, right? And so he's someone who's just happy to call attention to himself, and that's why I'm a little wary about just saying like, oh yeah, sure, about the spherical astrolabe.
And
But
I
mean,
have the
David
same.
King is he's really good at instruments. So I mean,
Absolutely. So when he says something, you actually stop and check yourself twice. But at the same time, I actually examine the instrument myself, so I know that it is not the best of the instrument. And knowing that Musa Jalinus has a better knowledge about astronomy, I start thinking this may not be the work of him. But at the same time, if he's an instrument maker, sometimes you actually make sacrifices because it looks much better. So but it is still debatable. Then that's good to know, because I'm always suspicious about my findings. So I am actually having this kind of thing. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Dear Professor, I also like to ask, although Moses Galeno spent a significant amount of time in Istanbul and at the court of Beyazıt II, he was not a unique case. There were other Jew scholars associated with scientific activity at the court of Beyazıt II. Could you give us a little bit of detail about this, especially in regards with the 15th and 16th centuries?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, I think at first you want to, if you're looking at the phenomenon of Jewish scholars at the Ottoman court, you want to keep it, one wants to keep in mind that this started under the reign of Fatih Sultan Mehmet. I mean, for example, his personal physician Yaqub Pasha was Jewish, and he was from Italy, and I mean, they have more than one physician, but and then some others, the Hamun family, who came originally from Andalusia to the Ottoman Empire, they were physicians of I think first of the sultans, and one member of that family was a physician of Bayezid II, and then Selim. Right. There's, that's just sort of known from general sources. Sometimes you get Jews, like there's this case, and I read about this in one of Professor Ihsanolu's books. His name is, he ends up converting to Islam, and but he's at first is Elijah ben Abraham, or Ilyas ibn Ibrahim el-Yahudi, right? So he's Jewish at that point. And he was also like, he made an instrument that he produced an astronomical instrument that he dedicates to the Sultan. After his conversion, he becomes Abdus-Salam el-Muhtadi. And those are just sort of general figures one reads about in other sources. I mean, in terms of my own research, I think one wants to keep in mind an older relative of Moses Galeano, whose name is also Moses Galeano, but he's probably an uncle because his patronymic, the Ben or Ibn, is a different name. Yeah, and so he was, it's hard to know his dates, but he was either working late in the reign of, certainly late in the reign of Mehmet, but possibly into Bayezid's reign, also known as Moses Galeano. Sometimes Galeano, the one I'm really working on, criticizes other Jews who are competing with him at court. And so at one point in a text of his called Puzzles of Wisdom, it's in Hebrew, he criticizes a Jewish physician, Samuel Abulafia, who must have come, given his last name, I mean, he came from Andalusia. Right. Then there are others like his teacher, Elijah Mizrahi, who was the chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire, but also a scholar. He wrote a commentary in Hebrew on the Almagest, and he had access to the Ottoman court. And he had, when you look at that commentary, has never really been fully studied. I mean, people, myself, others have talked about bits and pieces of it, but it's fascinating when you look at it. He's writing about the Almagest, and he's working off of the Hebrew. But when he gets to certain places in the text and kind of rethinks the Hebrew translation based on not only the Arabic, but also the Greek.
Very
right.
interesting.
And so that's that, he's at the court. Mizrahi's own teacher, I mean, this would now have been under the reign of Fatih Sultan Mehmet. Mordechai Chomatiano was also had access to the Ottoman court. I mean, again, Chomatiano died at this point in 1487, so really mostly under Mehmet, but still. So there are others.
Are there any pattern that, because I haven't studied Byzantine times scholars in Constantinople, so not knowing, if there were any kind of Jews working for the Byzantine court. Because you said Fatih's physician comes from Italy, so he came after the conquer of Istanbul, I think.
Yeah, presumably, yeah. I don't, off the top of my head, I just haven't. So my current project, right, is really, it's about a network of Jewish scholars centered on Crete, but they have strong connections to the Ottoman Empire and also to the Republic of Venice. And so of the scholars I'm studying, there's nobody I've come across who was working for the Byzantines before the conquest. That doesn't mean there aren't. It just means they're it's out of sort of my lens. In this fellow I mentioned, Humatiano, he ends up at the court of Sultan Mehmet, but he was active before the conquest. I mean, he was active 25 to 30 years before the conquest. And so he wrote some texts. He wrote, what did he write? He wrote a commentary on astronomical tables. And he well, I mean, like, okay, other people have, but he was in that commentary, he defends the astronomy that was available in Greek, but which came from Islamic societies via some Greek translations performed in around 1300. And so he's defending like Islamic in Hebrew, but he's defending the Greek translations of Islamic astronomy against Byzantine Christian critics. So Humatiano was involved in intellectual life, I mean, prominently, but I can't say much about his connection to.
At least we can say a little bit, there is an increase of a momentum when it was in the Ottoman Empire then.
Right. I mean, basically, the conquest, on one hand, it didn't hurt the Jews. I mean, it wasn't awful. It was not awful for the Jews of Asia Minor. The one thing that speaking more broadly, I mean, one thing that would have been difficult was the Sürgün, right? Yeah. The forced repopulation of the capital definitely was hard on. Well, it's hard on Muslims, but it was also hard on Jews. Yeah. In a way, that's good for science, because then people are brought from the provinces into the capital, right? And it's conceivable. It's conceivable Galeano it's conceivable that's what brought Galeano's family to Istanbul. There's a debate about where he's from. Like, we don't really know. And where is this? In the translation of those astronomical tables that Galeano Jalinos did from probably Latin, maybe Catalan, into Arabic, he refers to himself, and this is going to be hard to say. I wish I had a board, but like something I could write it. So he refers to himself as Tirawi. So that's ta, ya, ra, wow, yeah. Now I first thought that was because I was like, this is great. Maybe he comes from Tire. Like Tire, right? That's possible. And then you see the Sürgün would probably have been what brought his family to the capital. But it's possible, and I learned this from a Spanish colleague, that you just move the dots. So Tirawi or Tiravi can become Yatrawi. That is an Arabization of Iatros. So like the Greek for physician. See, because all these Jews were originally speaking Greek. And so I'm a little you don't know.
Hence the name Gallianos. So it's not. even pronunciation is Greek, I think.
It is Greek.
Isn't
Oh
it?
yeah, I mean his last name's Greek. Yeah.
Yes,
Oh yeah. There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Uh, Another thing about that specific time, we do know those people actually, and you actually give an example about a religious scholar who also deals with mathematical sciences a little bit. But can you say this is something of a general in the scholars, or Jewish scholars in the Ottoman Empire, or we see group of people who work on religious sciences and a group of people who works on mathematical sciences exclusively? Is there that kind of a definition, that the differentiation for the scholars?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think it reminds me a lot of what you see in the history of Islam. I mean, look
It's
at
like the polymaths that we have
it's like
seen.
the same thing. Yeah. I mean, right. I mean, it would be someone like it's like Abdurrahman Muayyadzadeh, right, who had really broad interests. And like I mean, and this makes sense if you look at what you would need to know to read a Kalam texts. And as far as the Jewish scholars are concerned, I mean, you could chalk it up to maybe being in an Islamic context, right? But it's also there could be external reasons, and there are also internal reasons, in that this community was very much affected by the work of Moses Maimonides, or Musa ibn Maimun in Arabic, who was he's probably the most important Jewish scholar who actually lived. He died in 1204, and he was he was a physician for Salah ad-Din. He was a philosopher. He was a legal scholar. I mean, you can imagine him being like, he had the kind of range that someone like well, even greater than Ibn Sina, frankly. I mean, it's really kind of a mixture of Ibn Sina and Al-Ghazali or something. I mean, except for the Sufism. Really remarkable. And anyway, but this blending of science and philosophy and religious thought that you find in the work of Maimonides is kind of re-emerges.
Quite natural for Jewish
scholars, because they're all commenting on Maimonides, and of course Maimonides was heavily affected by Islam. I mean, Maimonides is only as amazing as he was because he was working in Islamic
civilian
context.
philosophy, I imagine.
So I think that's though it's not at all strange that they're so widely read and interested. Yeah.
All right.
And Professor, in one of your articles, you discuss whether the transmission of scientific knowledge conducted by the Jewish scholars were up to date or not in comparison of the 15th century European astronomy. A well-documented point of contact between the Jew and Christian scholars in Europe was the translation of Aveiroist's corpus into Latin. And there's evidence that the last Jewish Aveiroist, Elia del Medigo, knew of recent efforts to develop new theories in astronomy. Could you tell us in more detail about Del Medigo's importance for interreligious scientific cooperation?
Right. Yeah. No. Thanks for that. Yeah. Sure. So Del Medigo, who died, if this is your first time, like he died, hearing about him, he died in 1493.
Yes.
Yeah, just in case he's probably new to many people. He was new to me before I started this project. And he's primarily a philosopher. I mean, that's, as you said, Sana, he's the, perhaps he's described maybe as the last Jewish Aveiroist. And he's significant because he had major contacts among Europeans. He was the instructor of a Renaissance Christian scholar named Pico della Mirandola. And Del Medigo's from Crete, right? And he goes over to Padua and Venice a lot. And because Crete was part of the Republic of Venice, that was kind of a natural, place for him to go and to study and teach. And so he has these very significant contacts. But Averroism isn't just kind of about the soul. It isn't just about connections with God. It also has something to say about the natural world. And while in the history of Islamic science, the Aveiroist approach to astronomy did not get that much traction. It wasn't that popular. that approach did really well in Europe. And Europeans were quite interested in just about anything Averroes had to say, including about science, including about astronomy. So there's that. So Delmedigo is important because he's instructing, he's a point of contact. And then the next thing you want to keep in mind is that Moses Galeano, like the one I'm interested in, Musa Jalinus, he knew something about a Jewish improvement on Aveiroist astronomy. And my research has shown that this was the subject of my second book. In this Jewish improvement of Aveiroist astronomy, basically, the key Muslim figure is El-Batruji, if you've heard of him, who flourished around 1200. And I mean, there are Batruji manuscripts actually in Istanbul. So Galeano knows about Jewish improvements on Batruji, and those Jewish improvements on Batruji, I found, contain a version of the Tusi couple, which is an important theory from Maraja. It's an idea or a theory that reappears in Copernicus's astronomy. And this came out in a review of my book. I didn't see it myself, but a colleague saw it, that this Jewish improvement on Aveiroist astronomy or on Batruji also contains a version of a model by this fellow Ibn Shatir, who was another theoretical astronomer from the Islamic world, whose theories also reappear in Copernicus's work. And so this is why Delmedigo is important. See, he's from Crete, so he's like a point of contact between this Jewish network of scholars and European thinkers. European thinkers are very interested in Averroes. As you asked in your question, Delmedigo was aware of why Averroes could be relevant to astronomy. So in other words, Delmedigo is kind of paving the way for contacts between European scholars and Galeano, who knows about the most advanced Islamic astronomy. And
it's very interesting, right? Because since he is quite influential, whatever he writes, he's actually, I think, impact is much more than anyone who's actually translating something or at least preparing something from east to west, I think.
Who's he?
The one who's translating. So
Delmedigo. Yeah.
Oh,
he's very right. He's connected. Oh yeah, totally. He's really connected, right? Like he's a Jew from Crete, but he wrote texts in Latin. He wrote it. I mean, he also wrote in Hebrew, but he wrote in Latin. I mean, printing was starting up, and so he's actually the editor of certain printed versions of Averroist texts. So yes, I mean he would have been incredibly well connected.
Otherwise, I think it wouldn't be, because we see sometimes so many important treatises gone unnoticed because of the person is not influential. So this is quite important.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, going back to Sena's question, I mean, Delmedigo remarks that there are more recent improvements on astronomy, and it's hard to know sometimes, like when you read, it's the same thing in Hebrew, but if you read in Arabic, muta'akhirin, more recent or modern astronomy. So which century, right? Is it like simply, is this around the time of Harun or Rashid? Are they comparing like Biruni to Ptolemy? Yeah. Right? Yeah, Biruni is modern, or is it after, and you don't really, I don't want to read too much into that, but it definitely means that Delmedigo thinks Averroes is relevant and that it's still relevant. And so he's really clearly setting up points of contact between other Jewish scholars and Christians.
Thank you very much.
And may I ask if you comment on double-sidedness of the transmission of knowledge in the Ottomans? Did the Jewish scholars transmit more knowledge from the Ottoman to Europe or from Europe to Ottomans?
Yeah. I'd have to say, like, it depends what you mean. Well, the quick answer is I'd have to say it's about equal. I try to think of it as kind of an economy, right? And so I think what I'm trying to say is here's what I'm trying to contribute. We've known, or by kind of professors and their professors knew, I mean, since before most of us, if all of us perhaps, were born, that wow, it certainly looks like Renaissance astronomers like Copernicus are getting information from Muslim astronomers. I mean, that's been known since the 50s, the 1950s. The thing is, well, how did it happen? And my contribution, I hope, is that with these Jewish scholars, we're seeing that they're bringing Western knowledge to the Ottomans. And once you see that happen, then you get a sense of why people would be talking to each other. Because, while I would agree, like in astronomy, the Muslims were way ahead of Renaissance Europe. They were, until Copernicus, they were. But then if that's a fact, why would they ever bother to talk to a European scholar, right? Because they're so much smarter. So by finding that Galeano, for example, is bringing European information in other fields back, you can see how a trading operation would have gone on. And so, because if you think of it as an economy, it's going to probably be at least perceived to be equally valuable knowledge. It's just harder to kind of get your head around, because we're in an age where science is so important. But it wasn't quite like that then, or it depends what you think of as science. I mean, Galeano's bringing back stuff about medicine. I mean, that's important, right? Galeano's bringing back stuff about tables. I mean, European astronomers were capable of doing observations. So I mean, like, why, you just have to look at a broader range of exchange, and then I think it does it's going to kind of balance out.
I think it's a little bit more like a natural thing anyway, because I'm working on John Greaves, and John Greaves is in a movement to the Ottoman Empire and what he's doing here. And I see it's not just natural, but at the same time, they want to actually pursue this kind of thing out of specific interests. With as long as they have money, they can do that anyway. But not always everyone is like that. It doesn't have to be a major point of thing that you have to have a major idea that we have to follow up. So we have to go there and take whatever we can and bring it back. But at the same time, you move around because you are a scholar. You can actually go to different places. And can I ask anything about Republic of Venice? Why is that important to be in Republic of Venice? Is it because they're more prone to helpful or let's say safer to Jewish people, or in comparison to the rest of Europe, or just because they were already there naturally anyway before that?
Right, they were there. I mean, there were Jews. There have been, I forget exactly when the Jews came to Crete. I mean, I have this in chapter 1 of my book, but it was well before. I mean, it was well before my whole story gets going. I mean, it's the families I'm most interested in get to Crete in like 1200, 1300. So they're there for a long time.
The Crusades, I imagine, perhaps. Crusades.
Yeah, and the plague. The original outbreak of the bubonic plague moved people around. I mean, if you look at, if you just sort of look at some of the names, you can kind of, like Del Medico is probably coming from like Del Medico, like they were the doctors, Medico. They're probably coming maybe from Italy. Some people I work on have the last name Ashkenazi, which means you're a Jew from Central Europe, which means they obviously came from there, right? And no one who actually lives in Central Europe would have that last name because it would be redundant, right? It's like nisbas in Arabic, right?
And like, saying El Misri to a person who lives
in like, I mean, it would be, right. Nobody in Egypt is known as Misri, or I mean, how many people in Istanbul are going to be Istanbulu? I mean, because like it's
why would you say that? Everyone is
right, would you say? Yeah. But anyway, right. So they were there for a long time. I think, this is all, the reason these Jewish scholars are interested, at least to me, is they are able to be trans-regional at a time when it would have been a little harder for Muslims to do it. Not because they might not have wanted to, but the politics were not good.
I imagine, yes.
Because this is when Europe is unifying, and they're the idea of Europe is emerging, the idea that there's sort of like this unified Christian entity. And so being an Ottoman Muslim would not have been so great. The fear, like, the conquest, it just, in people's minds, right? Whereas Jews are not really well liked, but don't really pose the military threat that the Ottomans.
That's true.
So, and that doesn't mean there wasn't exchange. I mean, other scholars have found exchange between Europe and the Ottoman Empire, both before and after. I mean, but certainly, no doubt. I just with the people I'm working on,
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah.
And dear professor, you often mention about both Muslims and Christians' interest in the Hebrew manuscripts. And you state that an investigation of the full dimensions of the context between Christian, Muslim, and Jewish scholars are topics for longer projects. Could you share with us if you have any long-term plans for the enlightenment of these networks?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm trying to get a book published about this network. So yeah, I am. I mean, it's I mean, that's what I'm just trying to get done, like, right now. I think it's a really it won't be the last word on this. I'm sure other people, I think if somebody really gets interested in what Christians are up to, or if someone starts looking at exchange 30 years later than I am, or 30 years before, you'll find something out. I just picked, when I'm working on this network of Jewish scholars, because I started off, and this is actually how I met Professor Fazlolu. It's about 15, 17 years ago. We were working on a project about the broader context of Copernicus, and I got assigned, you have to work on the Jews. So, okay. And then I found out about Galeano Gelinos, and thus, like, so the people I'm working on were sort of, I found them because of the connection with Copernicus. If you take a different approach, you'll find something. I'm sure you'd find something else. So I encourage other people to keep going.
How to approach this then? Because whenever I actually try to do something, David King did a lot of things. Yes, I know, but at the same time, there are so many things to do, and I find myself alone on many of the subjects. That if I want to go in, I have to do everything by myself. So, do we need to have a group of people working together to be able to do this much easier, or just one person who is interested in these kind of projects might actually do something about it? Because it's a little bit technical question, perhaps, but I mean, are you working with a group of people, or you're just working by yourself with these?
At this point, I mean, as I said, I got interested in this because of a larger project. But no, I mean, my current book, it's me. I mean, it's just I mean, I'm just the one writing it. Yeah.
We need more people to do this then, I think, because one person, it takes a lot of time and
it takes a lot
much effort. So I think
it does. I mean, our field is underpopulated. I think scholars in Turkey are doing a great deal. I think that when I read, say, Nazariyat, or like, I mean, here we are, you're all up at what, 1040, it's almost 11 or 2300 or whatever in Istanbul, and you actually care enough to be talking to me. So clearly Turks are doing okay.
Thank you.
But I think I mean, in North America, it's not as, there aren't as many, there's not the density of people working, at least on astronomy. I mean, things have shifted much more to medicine, life sciences, biology, which is okay. I mean, it's just not quite the same. It's not quite the same thing.
Yeah, I feel.
May I ask one?
I'm sorry, Tahoja, please. I feel the same as Tahoja, because my subject is history of optics in Ottoman science, especially the formation of rainbow and halo during the reign of Beyazıt II. So you feel so lonely because you really need to communicate with other people about the things you read and understand, and you really wish if we were a group of people chatting everything I'm reading. But maybe like Dimitri Kutas is saying in his book about Avicenna, the next generation, we are right now all alone dealing with our subjects, but maybe the next generation, it will be a group project, because we really need physicians, mathematicians, linguistic people, or people with many disciplinary focuses to come together and talk about these subjects.
Right. Well, I mean, I think like just because I said I'm working on the project alone and writing it, I mean, I kind of like that. But at the same time, I also like to talk to people. And as you're saying, Senna, I mean, I think people have different personalities and constitutions and approaches. And, you know, sometimes, I mean, I have to say I like doing things alone. But at the same time, I also like talking to other people because I won't find my own mistakes. I won't get ideas, you know? So, and sometimes I think I wish there were more of a blend. I mean, I think the past 2 years have been very difficult where, you know, I haven't really been anywhere, and it's been hard for everyone.
Yeah.
And so I think we feel even more solitary than it used to be.
A little bit of difference too, but because, for example, I have been to different lectures. I gave different lectures in different universities around the world because of COVID as well, by the way, because I would have never been to MIT I would have never been to University of Coimbra in Portugal out of nothing for one lecture. So this also opened up a little bit of different type of things.
It does. No, I mean, it does. You're right. The pandemic isn't all bad. I mean, you know, this would have been, if we had never become so dependent on Zoom, I'm not sure I'd be talking to you right now. On the other hand, I could be in Turkey. I'm sure I would have come to Turkey in the past 2 years. And then there's like, you know, and then I'm like hanging out at not hanging out, actually working at you know, at say the Süleymaniye or something like that. And then we could actually see, like I could look at a text. Right. And that's sort of lost. I think what's hard, you know, the spontaneity and really sitting down with something is lost. Workshops are really tough. I just did a workshop yesterday online, and it was like off. It would have been amazing if it were live, and it was not pleasant. You know.
Well,
I'm sure like some
people,
I mean, I'm sure hopefully this is ending. I'm sure like a lot of other people who are out there right now are just like, would this guy shut up? I mean, because it can be very hard to listen.
No, I mean, I agree with you, because even when I'm talking about, even asking questions, I'm actually just looking at myself. Everyone, I'm seeing names, not even actually faces most of the time. So it's always challenging. May I ask one thing? You may not have an answer for this, but you know, whenever I try to study something, I realize that there are some holes that needs to be filled. It's so important topics someone needs to be studying, but also I write down as a side note, but I would never actually go into detail because it takes someone else to do it. So do you have something like this that you can share? You don't have to answer, but you know, about the Jewish scholars about in the Ottoman Empire, for example, if someone wants to look into this kind of a topic as a jumpstart, do you have any kind of advice to give them?
Jews in the Ottoman Empire.
The latest centuries, I think, is
sure. I mean,
yeah.
Well, I mean, if you are, maybe after this, we should open up for some questions from the people online, because
that's true.
there's a you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna send you a chapter. I'm turning on my email only so I can send you. Wait, I'm going to send it to Senna because I've got her emails coming up, and I'm sending you a survey article, and there are names in it, and you know, and then it's not by me, it's by a colleague, but it's good. I refer to this work a lot, and so can you. And well, I'm just looking at this and trying to find it. So
That's very good. So we can actually-
and that's what I would do if somebody actually decides to get interested in this. Oh my God, where the heck is this?
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much for that. Yes.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and then
Even preparing that kind of a list takes a lot of time. Specifically if
oh,
there
here
are
we go.
students.
Yeah, got it.
Yes.
Boom. So I'm just sending. It's just a blank email with an attachment. Okay, there you got it. Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, all right. What else can I do here?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much for this lively talk. And we are now open for questions. And we might actually turn on your sounds as well if you want to ask the questions in person, not writing. And if you want to have any questions, please do write it in the chat. We can also read it for you. While waiting for that, you are working on this project, but you must have some other ideas as well about the project that you might be doing, because I think you're about to finish this book, I imagine, hopefully.
Yeah.
Is there a timeline that in a couple of years or in 5 or 10 years, because you would know, right? When will you be finishing that, at least?
No, maybe 2 years.
2 years, okay.
1 to 2 years. I mean, I think hopefully it could be out. But like publishers have something to say.
Oh, so, yeah, well, I know. Tell me about it. So, but at least as long as you finish most of the things,
it feels pretty finished, but we'll see.
That's good. Yeah. Professor Fazlollah, you might have a question if you want, and we might actually. You're muted. Sorry. You're muted. Sorry. Sana, can you?
Yes, you can do it.
You can now. Yes.
Thank you, Taha. We discussed Robert, lots when we met, in different collegiums. So I have no question now.
Okay, thank you. I know you talk a lot and you do many things together. So, but let me just one person, Meltem Kocaman. Yes. We'll be asking questions.
Hi. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My question is maybe not completely matches your field of expertise, because I am not working on early modern period, but I would like to ask about the printing houses. We know that the first printing houses in the Ottoman Empire were founded by the Jewish community in the early modern period, long before the Ibrahim Müteferrika's printing house. And as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, the books printed by the Jewish printing houses were mostly about religion or law or calendar, etc. And it seems that these books were not about sciences, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, etc. I find it very interesting because what I read, it's very vivid commercial or cultural activity. These printing houses were not only one, and there are a few numbers of them founded in Istanbul, Selanik, Izmir, etc. And the articles I have read says that the Ottoman Empire in the early modern period was nearly the capital of the Hebrew printing. Maybe not the first rank, but and you were talking about the scientific elite related with the Ottoman court, and it's I find interesting the situation. What does this tell us about the interest of Jewish community, the public itself, not the scientific elite? How was their relation with science?
So thanks for that question. It's a good one. I just put into the chat box a web link. And it's a link to a page with information about a 1531 book that's printed in Istanbul by a Jewish printing press, Sonsino. And actually, that press in one incarnation or another still endures, not in Istanbul, but it's still a famous kind of printing family. That text, so there's a page from a book called Aderet Eliyahu, which is a Jewish law code. And early on in that law code, there's a section on lunar crescent visibility calculations. This is a problem that is also important for Muslims. And so there are tables in there, as well as like with explanations of how to use them. And so these tables actually I've published because they were produced by two scholars who were students of someone I talked about, Humatiano. He had two students who he like put out these tables. And it's these tables evince either directly or indirectly a knowledge of some aspects of Islamic astronomy. The one biobibliographer, kind of a German Jewish version of someone like Tashkipuzadeh or someone like that, or Haji Khalifa, like same thing like for Judaism, claims that the authors of this text knew about the tables from Zij ul Bey. That may or may not be true, but it's not crazy. Anyway, so you're right. There aren't like astronomy books. You can find in this like some serious scientific content. I think probably it would be, I don't think it's so different actually with Islam, in that some of the most important texts for the history of astronomy there are like 4 manuscripts. There are important texts like say Tusi's Tadhkira where there are plenty, like there are probably at least 100, if not more. I mean, and that text actually got printed in Italy. So there might be some correlation between like numbers of manuscripts and need for printing, but anyway, yeah.
Thank you very much. Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
All right, let me ask any questions. I think.
Robert, do you know that is there any studies, before Fatih, there are some, I think some Jewish physicians at the court of Sultan Orhan Gazi. Do you know, is there any study about that?
I didn't know about that. No. So thanks.
I think it's important because,
yeah, that
I don't remember his name, but, I read it from, there was a Byzantine, I don't remember his name, but he wrote a diary about his discussions, debates between Ottoman scholars at the time of Sultan Orhan. And he talks about the Jewish scholars.
I
think that there are 7 physicians, Jewish physicians, and he gave one of his name, and he think that the Jewish scholars, they try to create debates between Muslim and Christians. Okay.
yeah, that's right.
So I wonder, if there any study about that. You don't know.
I don't know off the top of my head, but thank you for mentioning this to me. Thank you. That's
I will send you. When I remember
if you can.
his name. I sent you email about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
We have a question from Abdul Samad Yilmaz. If you can, yes, unmute this.
My question is also about the Jewish physicians. In the 17th century, there are a lot of Jewish physicians who were trained at Padua University.
Yeah.
Particularly the ones they came to Istanbul, Constantinople, court physicians. They were some other physicians, independent physicians, etc. Some of them, one of them is actually the grandson of the Elijah Medigo, Del Medigo, I think.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of the growing numbers of the Jewish physicians who were trained at the Padua University, can we talk about the network of Padua in the Ottoman Empire in the 17th century?
You might. I think one thing you've pointed out, Abdussamet, if I may, is the numbers increase as time goes on. And so if you start looking at what goes on between, say, 1550 and 1600, in many cases, the numbers are just greater and there's more information. So in a lot of respects, what you're saying, in all respects, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. One thing when I have trouble with this word network, I use it myself. So I'm not saying you shouldn't use it. It's complicated. What's a network? And one thing I struggle with is, would the scholars have thought they were in a network? But there's no doubt that in the time you're talking about, there would have been a number of Jewish scholars in Istanbul who had studied, at Padua, who knew each other. Yeah, totally.
That's very good.
Totally, yeah. And Joseph Del Medico is much more studied. There's a book. For a while there's been a book out about him, and I know a colleague of mine is trying to write another book about him. So he on his own is a fascinating.
Joseph Del Medico, you mean? Huh?
Yeah, Joseph Del Medico.
He's a student of Galileo Galilei. Yeah, he visits.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Oh.
But like,
of course.
No, I mean,
he's a
really,
student of Galileo Galilei. I wrote a little bit about him in my articles. You can find.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. Yeah.
He visited Cairo and he had a debate, very important debate about trigonometry, I think, between Ramazan. I don't remember his name. The Egyptian mathematician. He discovered, and after that.
Yeah, that guy. You remember?
After Cairo, he came to Istanbul.
Yeah.
And also he met with Jewish scholars who are working on Kabbalah.
Yeah.
And also he had some debate with them.
Yeah.
So it's important. As I know that he wrote his autobiography, I think.
Yeah.
Del Medico.
Yeah.
He's talking about his visitings.
Yeah.
So I sent his name.
Yeah, Gregory Palamas. He was in the Hesychast controversy.
He's talking about the Jewish physician at the court of Orhan Gazi. Yeah.
Do you have a follow-up question, Abdulhamid Yilmaz?
No, thank you.
Perfect. Any questions? Okay. I think we actually managed to come to 1 hour limit anyway. And may I thank you again, Professor Morrison, for joining us. Giving us all this information, all these leads for us to be able to follow up. And yes, you were just saying.
I just sent a book about Delmet. That's the classic book on Joseph Del Medico. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
Sure.
And
thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening for you, I imagine. Good afternoon, perhaps.
Good afternoon, But anyway, all right.
Thank you. And we will meet
until the next time. Yeah.
Exactly. Next time, hopefully in Istanbul.
In real life. Maybe. In real life.
Yes,
yeah. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Next meeting will be about Nisaburi, maybe, huh?
Inshallah. Yeah.
You wrote a book about him.
Yeah, I know. I could. Yeah.
We know too. Yes.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for everyone, and we'll be meeting up for another one. Yes. Thank you. Let's stop the recording. I think it'll be all right.